Some people believe that everything happens for a reason, that the universe has a plan for you to follow, whereas others believe that we are in a simulation and everything that happens is planned by some greater power controlling the simulation. Now, I'm talking about this because today we are going to be looking at some of the weirdest coincidences in history. So let's get right on into this video. Starting off this countdown, we have Jean-Marie du Barry. On February 13th, 1746, a French man named Jean-Marie was executed for the murder of his father. Hundreds of years later, on the exact same day, a man named Jean-Marie du Barry was also sentenced to death. He had also taken the life of his father. So what are the odds that two unrelated people with the same name both killed their fathers and then got executed on the same day? Like, that is just way too freaky. In our ninth spot, we have the dollar bill. Now, this is a pretty wholesome one for you all. When a woman named Esther was young, she had written her name on a couple of dollar bills after a bad breakup. She then told herself that she was going to marry the man that brought the bill back to her. Well, years later, she was dating a man named Paul Gratchen. The day he asked Esther to be his girlfriend, they were at a sandwich shop. As he was paying for the meal, he got handed a dollar bill with the name Esther written on it. The bill she wrote years prior. And in the end, they ended up getting married. Now, how wholesome is that? The universe literally gave her what she had manifested. Coming in at number 8, we have the girls with the red balloon. In 2001, a 10-year-old girl named Laura Buxton decided to release a red balloon from her front yard with a message on it. The balloon said, "Please return to Laura Buxton," and it had her address written on it. Well, this balloon traveled 140 miles and ended up landing on the yard of another 10-year-old girl's house. This girl's name was also Laura Buxton. Like, what are the odds? The two Laura Buxtons ended up meeting and they discovered that they had tons of similarities, not just their age and name. For example, they both had a guinea pig, a gray rabbit, and a 3-year-old chocolate lab. They both also looked alike and dressed alike. I'm telling you, this is just way too freaky. Like, what are the odds? I'm gonna be saying that a lot in this video. What are the odds? Moving on to number 7, we have Mark Twain and Halley's Comet. Every 76 years, Halley's Comet is visible to the naked eye as it soars past Earth. Well, American writer Mark Twain was born on one of Halley's Comets passing in 1835. The next year that the comet was said to pass was in 1910, and Mark Twain predicted that he was going to die that year. He said that he came into the world with the comet and that he was going to leave the world with the comet as well. And Mark Twain was right. Mark Twain passed one day after the comet's closest approach in 1910. So not only did Mark Twain predict his own death, but his birth and death both seamlessly lined up with Halley's Comet. How freaky. In our 6th spot, we have Violet Jessup. Violet Jessup has been named the luckiest woman as well as the unluckiest woman. She also has been given the name Miss Unsinkable, and I'll explain how she got those nicknames in just a second. So Violet was a stewardess and nurse who was on board 3 big sister ships when disaster struck each of them. It started with the HMS Olympic. She was on board the ship when it collided with the HMS Hawk. Then she was on the HMHS Britannic when it struck a mine at sea. And lastly, she was on board the Titanic, and she managed to escape all 3 of these disasters. At this point, she probably was cursed, and after the first accident, she shouldn't have gotten back on any ships ever again. So that's why she's been given the name the luckiest, unluckiest woman to live. She's been lucky to survive all the accidents, but unlucky that they kept happening to her.
Number 5, Civil War coincidence. There's another war coincidence in this list, but I saved that for number 1 because it's too good. But this one here is also pretty insane. The Civil War began in 1861 with the first Battle of Bull Run. The Bull Run is a stream that passes through the farm of a 46-year-old Wilmer McLean. Passes through his farm, right? The Bull Run is a stream that passes through the farm of a 46-year-old Wilmer McLean. This property was in Virginia. Now, of course, once the dust settled, the property was destroyed, so McLean left his home with his wife, and for nearly 4 years, the pair were considered safe while the war was otherwise changing history. Then in 1865, the war came to a close when Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant at the Appomattox Courthouse, which at the time was literally steps away from McLean's new property. Yeah, he saw the beginning and the end of the Civil War by accident. He saw it front row too. What are the odds? Number 4, George D. Bryson. Back in the 50s, this story was spread all over Kentucky. Back in the 50s in Louisville, a man named George D. Bryson was checking into a hotel room. Now he walked up and asked if there was any mail for him, which on one hand is an excellent bit. I'm gonna do that next time I go to a hotel for sure. Hey, got any mail? Classic, because you're just visiting them one time. There's no way there's gonna be mail. That's the joke, right? Except this time there was. This time the hotel manager said yes, and there was in fact mail from the previous occupant of the room, who had also had the same name, George D. Bryson. Yeah, what are the odds, right? I remember one time I met another McWaters, and he was not related to me, and he also was not thrilled that we had the same name at all. It was the most bizarre thing. I was like, hey, can we talk about this? He's like, yeah, cool. I'm like, are you my brother? I don't want you to be anymore. Get out of here. Then I got Kyle, and I was like, you know what? Change your name. Now you're my new brother. Replace this guy. Number 3, Yanni and Laurel. Before we wrap up this curious list, we have to throw a fun recent one in as well. Remember this Yanni Laurel thing back in 2018? I only heard Yanni for like 2 weeks straight. I heard Yanni. That's it. For 2 weeks, guaranteed. I was determined that it was Yanni, okay? And then one day I listened and it was Laurel, and then I couldn't go back. It was just Laurel all of a sudden. Like it immediately just changed. It was a completely different word. I felt sick. I was like, is this real life? How is this happening? This got everybody talking. What is this phenomenon that happens? Same with the dress mishap. What is going on? Well, many believe these viral illusions are proof that we're living in a simulation. Yeah, these arguments, the dress is blue, no it's white, these situations prove that we perceive reality in our own individual way. Everybody is living an individual perceived reality, so sometimes it doesn't always align. Sometimes we hear what we want to hear. Sometimes we hear Yanni, and then sometimes we hear Laurel, and it's completely different for some reason. I can't go back now, it's the worst. God, I hated this so much. The dress was back in 2015, then Yanni Laurel was 2018. I don't know, we're due for another glitch in the matrix any day now. I come back next week, I have a different first name all of a sudden, you're like, what? Number 2, miss unsinkable. It's one thing to narrowly miss a natural disaster or a massive accident, but to not miss a tragedy 3 times in a row, that sounds like a curse if you ask me. That's for sure a curse. Violet Jessup, this brave soul, survived 3 major ship disasters in history. She was born in 1887 in Argentina, and Jessup contracted tuberculosis at a young age and wasn't expected to live longer than a few months. She beat those odds and lived a healthy, relatively long life, which is shocking considering what I'm about to tell you. Violet, first of all, had a hard time getting hired as a stewardess on a ship because her youth and good looks were feared to distract crew and passengers. Yeah, you're too good looking to work on our ship. Welcome to the 1900s, I guess. Eventually, she got hired in 1910 to work aboard the HMS Olympic. Now, a year later, the Olympic collided with HMS Hawk, and the ship barely made it to shore. It was a tragedy. It was a huge disaster. Violet then served as a nurse aboard the Britannic right before World War I. The ship then collided with a German mine, and Violet jumped overboard and somehow survived with a fractured skull in the water and swam to safety. Afterwards, Violet worked on the Titanic, and on April 14th, 1912, she escaped another disaster on lifeboat 16. I mean, like, the odds that you survive 3 times in a row is one thing, but to experience 3 of those in a row? And finally, number 1, World War I soldiers. We have to finish on a grim note because this one is one of the most bizarre, in my opinion. When the First World War ended, the amount of British lives lost were around 1 million souls. The first reported casualty of World War I was a soldier named John Parr. And then after a countless number of lives were lost, the last soldier to die was a man named George Edwin Ellison. Now, both heroes' resting places are both in the St. Symphorian Military Cemetery, and they just happen to be 15 feet apart. And of course, this was not planned, nor were any of the entries on our list. It's just another bizarre coincidence that was discovered after the fact. Kicking off the list at number 10, the Hoover Dam coincidence. We'll kick this list off on a grim note because why not? The Hoover Dam, okay, this massive accomplishment. Its first victim, sadly, was a man named J.G. Tierney. It was December 20th, 1922, and the official death toll from industrial accidents during the construction of the dam from 1921 to 1935 was sadly around the 200 number. It was a lot of deaths. It was pretty sad. The earliest and latest victims of the construction were both father and son. And if that's not coincidence enough, both of them died on the exact same day. They both passed on December 20th. J.G. Tierney sadly drowned while conducting surveys in the Colorado River, and then 13 years later, Patrick Tierney fell off an intake tower right before construction was complete. Grim start, but stay tuned, we have a lot more. Number 9, legendary musical neighbors. It's weird how similar some of your neighbors are, right? Like growing up, we had 3 Davids on our street. They all loved cutting their lawn at 7 a.m. What a coincidence, right? We all hated them. What a coincidence. Well, the 60s rock icon Jimi Hendrix and the 18th century composer George Friedrich Handel, they were both neighbors. A couple hundred years apart, but they were both neighbors indeed. They lived in 23 Brook Street and 25 Brook Street in London. What are the odds, right? Had George been born 200 years later, we would have gotten the greatest collab of all time. Yeah, if you're local, of course you'll know there's a site there now. It's a famous landmark, but in terms of coincidences, there's music in the air on Brook Street. Something's going on. Kind of want to walk by and see if I'm better at playing the flute. Maybe I can play the flute on that block, who knows. Number 8, same taxi, different tragedy. Okay, here's a dark one, buckle up folks, pun intended. Back in 1975, a man was sadly hit by a taxi in Bermuda. Now he of course sadly did not make it, all the while a passenger in the taxi witnessed the entire horrible event. Now that's life-changing in itself, that's trauma, right? A year later though, the same driver was driving the same passenger when all of a sudden, the taxi hits another civilian. That civilian just happened to be the initial victim's brother. Horrible. This is some Final Destination stuff. I don't like it at all. Like this, what are the odds here, really? Let's move on to something a bit nicer, a bit. Number 7, same day, different vows. Okay, brightening up the mood a little bit, bringing us all back to happy land. CBC News reported this one. It's a little nicer of an ending. Fred and Lynette Dubendorf, husband and wife, they were taking a stroll down the beach with their dog, living up the life, right? The classic. When they noticed a message in a bottle had washed up on the shore. Now personally, I wouldn't be too excited, right? I'd be a little concerned. I've seen Castaway, you know? This message could go one of two ways. I have no idea. Like what's gonna be in here, right? Like help, 1876, you're like, oh no. But they opened it and inside they found wedding vows from another couple, Melody Kloska and Matt Bears. They had recently got married on a beach in Lake Michigan and word spread rather quickly. Thing is, their wedding date was the same as the couple who found the message. That was the bizarre coincidence here. So they took it as a sign that both pairs were meant to be and they sent a surprising letter to the lost couple's address. It's kind of nice, but it's also kind of creepy, you know? It'd be creepy on one hand. Hey, I found that message in a bottle. Cool, nice address, lovely home. Cool, I'll be back in a bit. Hope it works out. Who puts their address on a message? That's just asking for disaster.
We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the lucky numbers. So this story comes from Yamletef on Reddit. According to them, they were working as a call center operator when they asked the caller for her birthday. The caller said it was April 20th, which was the same birthday as the operator. When the next caller rang in, their birthday was April 27th, which was the same birthday as the operator's brothers. So at this point, the operator was like, okay, what is going on? And then the caller told her that maybe it's a sign and that she should go play the lottery with those dates. And that night, she went to the grocery store, played with those numbers, and ended up winning. It was only $380, but still, that's better than nothing. What are the odds that the winning numbers correlated to the caller's birthdays? In our 4th spot, we have the birthdays. According to a woman named Carrie Lee Simmons, her and her best friend share a number of eerie similarities. First, they both have the same birthdays. Not only that, but turns out that they were born in the same hospital, and their mothers shared the same recovery room. Keep in mind that their mothers were complete strangers. Then, 17 years later, the two connected and became best friends. When they found out that they were practically born beside each other, they completely freaked out. That's how you know that friendship is meant to be. In our 3rd spot, we have the sign. This next story is from Reddit user EricFP23. So the day in which her grandfather died, her mother had been sitting in bed next to him, comforting him. Before he passed, she whispered to him, "Tell Richie I say hi." Richie was her ex-husband who had passed away a couple years earlier. A couple of days after her grandfather's passing, Erica and her mom were at Walgreens when all of a sudden a huge truck drove by with some writing written on the side of it. It read, "Richie says hi." I am speechless. Like, that's just goosebumps. And Erica and her mom were speechless too. It's either just a super eerie coincidence or Richie sent that message from the grave. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the life savior. When Su Weifang of China was 50 years old, he was outside near a river by his home when he saw a boy drowning. So he jumped in and saved his life. 30 years later, he rescued another boy from the river. This boy had slipped and fell into the river and didn't know how to swim. Once again, Weifang jumped in and saved this boy's life. Well, turns out that the two people he saved were related. They were father and son. 30 years ago, he saved the boy's father from drowning. Then, he saved the father's son from drowning in the same river. so they believe that this man is their guardian angel. Starting off this countdown, we have the married couple's parents. This story surrounds a couple named Stephen and Helen Lee. A couple of years ago, the pair got engaged when they learned something very freaky about their families. While going through family photos during their engagement party, they found photos of their parents together. Turns out that Stephen's father and Helen's mom had actually dated and were set to get married in Korea in the 1960s. But their parents' disapproved, so they didn't. Had they not disapproved, the couple would have never been born. Not only that, but what are the odds that they got together after their parents had already gotten together? Kinda awkward if you ask me. Moving on at number 9, we have the church fire. On March 1st of 1950 at 7:25 p.m., a church exploded in Beatrice, Nebraska. At 7:20, a choir practice had begun, except none of the 15 choir members were there. And it's lucky that they weren't, or else they would have perished in the fire. Turns out that all 15 members arrived late due to personal reasons. So they were nowhere near the church when it exploded. What are the odds that all 15 members were running late? This story could have ended in tragedy. Thankfully, it didn't. Moving on to number 8, we have the wedding vows. In 2007, Fred and Lynette Dubendorf were walking along a beach clearing up some litter when they found a message in a bottle. After they opened it, they found it contained the marriage vows of another couple. Upon closer inspection, they found that their marriage dates matched. The couple who created the vows in the bottle were married on August 18th of that year. The Dubendorfs were married August 18th of 1979. Both couples were also married on beaches. The Dubendorfs were in complete shock and actually reached out to the other couple. Thankfully, the couple left their address in the bottle. Both couples now believe that their marriages were meant to be, especially Matt and Melody, the couple that wrote the vows in a bottle, who had several failed marriages before finding each other. They were skeptical about getting married again, but this to them is a sign that it was meant to be. Moving on to number 7, we have Edgar Allan Poe. This is one of the freakiest coincidences I have ever read about. So in 1838, Edgar Allan Poe wrote his only complete novel. It was called The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket. The book was about Arthur Pym, who goes on a nautical adventure. He hops on a boat as a stowaway and hides out there. But while aboard the ship, a mutiny occurs and a number of crew members lose their life. There's only 4 members aboard the ship now. One of the men was named Richard Parker. They kept him alive to help them control the ship. However, they encountered a terrible storm and things went south. The remaining 4 people on board are struggling to find food. So Richard was like, let's draw straws. Whoever gets the shortest straw will be killed and the others can eat them. So they did as Richard said, and he ended up drawing the shortest straw and then was eaten by his crew members. Believe it or not, but 46 years after that book was published, this happened in real life. In May of 1884, 4 men were traveling from England to Australia when they found themselves fighting for their lives. The men decided to draw straws and see who they should eat. The cabin boy drew the smallest straw. What was the cabin boy's name? Richard Parker. The same name as the guy who got eaten in the book. What are the odds of that? Is Edgar Allan Poe a psychic, or did he write history, or both? Moving on to number 6, we have Redbox. This story comes from Matinee25 on Reddit. A couple of years ago, her and her friend went to Redbox to see if they could rent the movie Tron. For those of you who don't know what Redbox is, basically it's an American video rental company that has these little kiosks you can go to and pick what movie you want, and then you can rent it and you'll get the DVD. So they went there, but they found out that they didn't have Tron. So they were like, okay, screw it, let's just rent another movie. Well, when they opened up the DVD case, turns out that inside was the movie Tron. Someone had put it back in the wrong case. But what are the odds? Because that's the movie that they wanted to see in the first place. Like, out of all the DVDs they could have gotten, they got the one with the switched disc.
Coming in at number 5, we have The Twin Theory Continues. We're getting even deeper into the wild world of twins. Is there some sort of connection, or was our next set of twins just the 2 most unlucky dudes to ever share a womb? Arthur and John Moford ended up in a hospital at the same time. These guys were twins and they ended up in the same hospital and they were both having heart attacks. They would die around the same time. Dude, if I had a twin, I would be like, you better be healthy. I don't need my good heart crapping out because you love Doritos. Coming in at number 4, we have Robert Fallon's best hand. Robert Fallon was on a hot streak in a poker game back in 1968. He was playing with some mobsters, and it turns out that they didn't trust he was just lucky, so they killed him on the spot, accusing him of cheating. Now, they didn't want to split up the money, but they also didn't want to stop the game, so they got a new guy to come in and play. This new dude was now on an even better hot streak, and eventually the mobsters told him what happened, and he realized that the guy who was killed was his absentee father who had been missing since he was a kid. Coming in at number 3, we have Mark Twain pulls a Babe Ruth. Calling your shots comes in all shapes and sizes, and with Mark Twain, it came in the form of calling out when he would die. That's a power of your own destiny that most people could never imagine. Mark Twain was born when the Halley's Comet passed by the Earth in 1835, and if you know the Halley's Comet, you will know that it comes around every 75 years like clockwork. When the next passing of the comet was coming through, Mark stated that he came with the comet and he will die with the comet. And just like that, when the comet passed, so did Mark Twain. Coming in at number 2, we have the Tyranny Curse. This is one of the strangest coincidences I could find. This is all tied to the construction of the Hoover Dam. The thing is, the scouting and construction of the dam spanned from the 1920s into the 1930s, and a lot of people died in the process. The first person who died was a guy named J.G. Tierney, and the last guy who died was Patrick Tierney. The spooky thing is that Patrick was J.G.'s son, so their deaths were the opening and closing ceremonies for the dam in the darkest way. Coming in at the number 1 spot, we have the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket. This is a famous book by Edgar Allan Poe, and it's about a boat that sinks and then a bunch of people on board get stranded and they have to eat one person from the boat. A pretty grim story, and it should be no surprise coming from Poe. But here's the thing. 46 years after this book came out, a boat by the same name went down and the people on board got stranded and they were forced to eat someone on board who is named Richard Parker. Now the crazy thing about this is the person who got eaten in EAP's book was also named Richard Parker. Yeah, that's kind of... Coming in at number 10, we have that sinking feeling. How many accidents out at sea do you have to have before you realize that you should never go on a boat again? For whatever reason, there are some people who will never have a good time out on the ocean, so you might want to find a job that doesn't have anything to do with H2O. Well, Violet Jessup was working as a nurse in 1911, and she was primarily on ocean cruisers. Her first accident at sea was when the boat she was on board of crashed into another boat. Luckily, she was able to make it onto one of the lifeboats and get out without a scratch. Now, she probably thought that that was just bad luck, and what better way to circumvent bad luck than by going on a boat that was apparently unsinkable? Yes, the next year she got a job on the Titanic. Well, that stinks, and I think we all know what happened there. Again, Violet was able to make it out without a scratch. After that, you would think, I am never going on a boat again, but a girl's gotta work, so there was no slowing her down. The final incident was on board of the HMS Britannic. The boat hit a mine and was going under. This time, she wouldn't be so lucky. She was able to make it out alive, but while escaping the sinking boat on a lifeboat, the lifeboat got sucked into the moving propellers of the Britannic and Violet received a serious blow to the head. But like I said, she lived. Probably never to go out to sea again. Coming in at number 9, we have There's My Wife. When do you think you're gonna meet your soulmate? Well, for some of us it's never gonna happen, so stop waiting and start getting really good at Call of Duty or something, because it's going to be a lonely existence. But for some other people, they might have already met the person that they're going to spend the rest of their life with, but they just don't know it yet. This was the very situation that happened to Amy Maiden and Nick Wheeler. The two of them are married now, but right before they were set to elope, they decided that they would go through some old family photos. Most of them were probably a nice hit of nostalgia, as most family photos are, but there was one that was particularly interesting. There was one of Nick on a summer vacation with his family when he was a kid. He was on the beach with his brothers and sisters, and in the background of the photo is Amy. What the hell? How is this possible? Is one of them a time traveler who was sent back in time to rewrite history by falling in love with the other? Well, no, it wasn't that sinister. Actually, Nick's family was on vacation in the town where Amy grew up, and it just so happens that Amy was on the beach at that exact moment. Sort of romantic, but also kinda weird. Coming in at number 8, we have Anthony Hopkins Needs Something to Read. We live in the golden age of literature. Anything you want to read, you can find in a second. You can just look it up on Google, and half the time you don't even need to pay for it because you can just steal it off the internet. But things weren't always this easy. When Anthony Hopkins was casted in the movie A Girl from Petrova, he wanted to be the best actor he could possibly be by finding a copy of the book so he could have a good idea of what the movie was going to be like before he was in it. But he couldn't find the book anywhere. Randomly, he found it on a train sitting in an empty booth. When he was finally on set for the movie, the director of the movie asked him if he could borrow a copy of the book because he had left his on a train. That's a weird, spooky connection right there. Coming in at number 7, we have the twin link. That has been a question for a long time. Do twins have some sort of neural link that lets them share thoughts and ideas? Does sharing a womb make you connected to someone forever in a way that cannot be explained yet by science? Well, no matter what your opinion is on this story is very strange. James Lewis and James Springer had a very strange thing happen to them when they were 39 years old. They found out that they had been separated at birth and were twins. Their mother gave up the two babies and they ended up in different homes. The weird thing is they both ended up with the name James. Then later in life they both became police officers. Both of their second wives were named Betty. Both of them had a son who they also named James, and they both had a dog named Toy. Now in the infinite universe, maybe this is just par for the course, and there's nothing going on here other than a roll of the die hitting the same number over and over. Or maybe twins are actually connected through some sort of psychic force. Coming in at number 6, we have My Buddy Umberto. Alright, this one is super freaky and I'll give you the whole story, but for it we have to travel back to the year 1900 on the day of July 28th. This was the day before the King of Italy, Umberto I, was assassinated. I would never want to be king because it seems like everyone is just trying to kill you all the time. Well, on this day Umberto went to a restaurant to hang out and get a little food, and he met a dude who looked just like him. He went up and talked to this guy, and it turns out that this guy was born on the same day as him, in the same town. They were both married to ladies named Margarita, and on the day Umberto became king was the day that this dude opened his restaurant. Whoa, that's a little freaky. Well, the next day Umberto was assassinated, and guess what? The restaurant owner was also killed.
Next up on our list today, we have the coincidental closeness of the rare Chelyabinsk meteor and the 2012 DA-14 asteroid, two incredibly rare events that occurred 16 hours apart on the exact same day, but seemingly had nothing to do with one another. On February 15th of 2013, an asteroid entered into Earth's atmosphere over the southern region of Russia and exploded, with a force equal to 20 to 30 of the atomic bombs used at Hiroshima. 1,500 people were wounded, and 7,000 buildings experienced varying degrees of damage as a result. After the explosion, the ground below was hot and the entire affected area smelled like smoke. As I said, something like this is extremely rare, and the event was also the only time in history that a meteor has been known to cause human injury. Not only that, but the meteor was not detected by authorities prior to it entering into the atmosphere. If that's not crazy enough, just 16 hours later, another asteroid named 2012 DA-14 came within 27,700 meters, 17,200 miles, of the surface of Earth, making it the closest asteroid of its size to have ever been recorded in modern times.
I'm gonna call this next story the real-life Final Destination because it sounds like a death you'd see in Final Destination. That's a movie you've seen, right?
No.
Anyway, this guy just could not escape the fate that was waiting for him. Henry Ziegland was born in 1861 in Honey Grove, Texas. He was a farmer who began dating a woman named Charla Karras. They lived together for a time, but in 1883, Henry dumped her. This left Charla utterly devastated, and in her despair, she ended up taking her own life. Charla's brother was filled with rage and blamed Henry for her death, and he decided he was gonna take his revenge. So one day he snuck into Henry's barn while he was tending to the horses and fired at him. The bullet grazed Henry, who then pretended to be dead. Believing he had killed Henry, the brother then turned the firearm on himself. Little did Henry know, but the bullet had lodged into a tree by the barn. Now, 20 years went by, and Henry decided to cut down a tree in front of his barn. It was too thick to cut with an axe, so he opted for dynamite. When the dynamite went off, Henry was killed instantly. Not from the explosion, he was a fair distance away, but from the bullet that had been lodged into the tree 2 decades earlier.
Next up, we have the strange life of Robert Todd Lincoln, or should I say strange saving. As we all should know, the 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth in a theater on April 14th of 1865. What you might not know is that during his presidency, Lincoln actually bore witness to 2 other assassinations of very prominent members of American society. The first was the assassination of Elmer Ellsworth, a Union Army colonel who was killed by a hotel owner in Virginia in May of 1868, and the second was a Union Army general named James B. McPherson, who was killed during the Battle of Atlanta in July of 1864. What's cool about this is that it's not actually the weird part. What's weird is that prior to the death of Abraham Lincoln at the hands of John Wilkes Booth, Abraham Lincoln's son, Robert Todd Lincoln, was actually saved by John Wilkes Booth's brother, Edwin Booth. Edwin, who was a famous actor at the time, had seen Robert Todd fall between the platform and a train at a train station and quickly pulled him to safety before things got gory. At the time, Edwin had no idea who Robert Todd was, and Robert Todd later recounted the incident, saying, "I was indebted to him for the rest of my life." Pretty strange stuff.
Speaking of Abraham Lincoln, he shares some pretty uncanny similarities with John F. Kennedy. People have listed tons of coincidences between the two, too many to list here, but some of the most famous include Lincoln and Kennedy both being elected to Congress in a year ending in 46. Then both were elected president in a year ending in 60. They both had security agents named William, who died at the age of 75. The eeriest similarities surround their deaths, though. Both presidents died after being fired at in the head on a Friday, and both were sitting next to their wives at the time. Lincoln died at Ford's Theater, and Kennedy died in a Lincoln car, which was made by the Ford Motor Company. Both had been accompanied by another couple, the male in each couple being wounded in the attack as well. And both of their successors were named Johnson. Lincoln was succeeded by Andrew Johnson, and Kennedy was succeeded by Lyndon B. Johnson. Lastly, the names Lincoln and Kennedy each have 7 letters. That's not a big one, but there's tons of others. Just read about it, it's nuts.
Next on our list, we have the striking life of Walter Summerford, and when I say striking, I mean it. Summerford was a British officer and a major in the British Army during World War I, who was struck by lightning 4 separate times on 4 separate occasions, 3 times when he was alive. The first time Summerford was struck was on the battlefield in 1981, after which he was paralyzed from the waist down. But luckily for him, after his retirement, he was rehabilitated, and after a while, he regained the ability to walk. Unluckily for him, just 6 years later, he was struck by lightning for a second time, and he became paralyzed on the right side of his body. Again, in time, he was able to regain the ability to walk and lived a normal life. Up until 1930, that is, when he was struck by lightning for a 3rd time while trying to walk through a park in Vancouver. This time he was paralyzed completely, and he remained bedridden until his death just 2 years later. He was laid to rest in a cemetery and given a gravestone that read, "In loving memory," although it's pretty hard to make it out now considering the fact that shortly after his burial, his gravestone was struck by lightning and split into 3 distinct pieces, one for each time he was struck while alive. Pretty strange coincidence.
Edgar Allan Poe is legendary when it comes to his fantastical tales of the dark and macabre, but in this case, truth was stranger than fiction because it was eerily close to a fictional work. In 1838, Poe wrote a novel called The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket. It's about a young man named Arthur Pym who goes on a sea voyage. In one part of the story, though, the crew of Pym's ship finds themselves in a desperate situation. They're stranded without food, so they decide to draw straws to see who will be sacrificed so the others can survive. The unlucky one is the cabin boy named Richard Parker, who ends up being killed and eaten by the others. About 46 years later, in 1884, a real-life ship sank, and their survivors were stranded at sea, and just like in Poe's novel, the men found themselves without food and decided to draw straws to see who would be sacrificed. And who was chosen? It was a young sailor named Richard Parker. Need I say more?
Kicking things off today, we have July 11th, 1991, and the Mayan calendar. On July 11th of 1991, a bunch of UFOs lit up the skies above Mexico City during a total solar eclipse. Thousands of people reported seeing a large metallic disc in the sky. Not only that, but footage of the object was captured and even broadcasted on the news. It was the first widely reported UFO sighting in Mexico City, which since that day has become a hotbed for UFO and unexplainable extraterrestrial activity. So what does this have to do with the Mayan calendar? Well, the calendar told of the July 11th eclipse, calling it the sixth sun of Quetzalcoatl, and claiming that it would bring about change and cosmic awareness, which I honestly think it's safe to say it did. Whether or not the calendar accurately predicting the events of July 11th is just some strange coincidence, or if the Mayans really did mean to calculate aliens' first major coming to Earth, for now remains a mystery. But I hope not for long, because personally, I am super eager to know more.
Alright, this next one is almost too incredible to be a mere coincidence. I'd love to see someone try and break this down and have it make any logical sense. This is the story of two twin brothers separated at birth who grew up and reunited as adults, only to find that they'd basically led identical lives. They were born in 1940 and adopted into different families in Ohio. The twins had no contact with each other for nearly 4 decades, but when they finally reunited, the similarities in their lives were just too uncanny. Both were named James by their adoptive parents, which, alright, common but incredibly awesome name, and everyone named James is a winner, but, not all that crazy. There's more though. Growing up about 40 miles apart, they both went by the nickname Jim, and each brother would go on to marry a woman named Linda. After divorcing their first wives, both Jims found love again with women named Betty. Both also had sons who they each named James Allen. They also both had dogs. And what were their dogs' names? Well, one was named Toy and the other was named Toy. I'd get it if you named your dog Skipper or something like that, typical dog name, but Toy? That's odd. Both brothers also enjoyed woodworking and had a penchant for mechanical drawing. Even their choice of vacation spots matched up. Both Jims would often go to the same Florida beach. Their health habits were similar. Both had a history of headaches, smoked the same brand of cigarettes, and even gained and lost weight around the same periods in their lives. When Jim Lewis and Jim Springer finally met in 1979 at the age of 39, it was like they were looking at a slightly alternate reality version of themselves. The case of these twins is a pretty fascinating study on how much of our behavior and preferences might be hardwired into our DNA.
Next up, we have the strange life of Violet Jessup, who, during her time working as an ocean liner stewardess, was present for 3 separate ocean disasters, all on Olympic-class ocean liners, including one of the most famous disasters, the sinking of the RMS Titanic. On June 14th of 1991, Jessup was aboard the RMS Olympic when it crashed with the ocean cruiser HMA Hawk. The Olympic, which was at the time of the incident the largest civilian liner in the world, suffered heavy damage and flooded in the crash, but luckily it was able to make it back to Southampton and no one was killed or even seriously injured. On April 10th of 1912, Jessup was working as a stewardess on the RMS Titanic when it hit an iceberg and sank just 4 days into its maiden voyage. Luckily, she was able to board one of the ship's lifeboats and she made it safely to shore. 4 years later, on November 21st of 1916, Jessup was working aboard the HMHS Britannic when the ship hit a mine and sank in the Aegean Sea. It was the largest ship to be lost during the First World War. As the ship sank, Jessup attempted to jump to safety, but instead hit her head on the ship's keel. She did, however, resurfaced, was rescued, and survived. This girl's got 9 lives, or at least 3.
Speaking of the Titanic though, let's talk about a little novella called Futility. After the sinking of the Titanic, folks were quick to point out the eerie similarities between the circumstances surrounding the real-life disaster and a fictional novella written by American author Morgan Robertson. which was written in 1898, 14 years before the sinking of the unsinkable ship. So what were the similarities? Well, the story describes a big British passenger liner called the Titan that is deemed unsinkable, but strikes an iceberg and sinks. Not only that, but the ship in the story doesn't have enough lifeboats and sinks in April in the North Atlantic Ocean. All the circumstances I listed there, other than the difference in the name of the ships, is identical to what happened in real life in 1912.
Coming in at number 4, speaking of signs, many people often look for the right signs when making a big decision or when looking for love. After going through a rough breakup, Esther Gracken wrote her name on several dollar bills and promised herself that she would only marry the man who brought one back to her. Wow, wouldn't you know? A few years later, a man named Paul dating Esther for a while, and he decided one day he's gonna ask her to be his girlfriend. That same day, as he was going to pay for his sandwich, he noticed that his dollar bill had Esther's name on it, written in pencil. Weird. He was just thinking about her. He decided to frame it and save it for her as a gift. When she got it, she gasped but didn't say anything until a few years later, because she didn't want to jinx it, when they were married. That was when she told him the story, and the two have lived happily ever since. Can't be explained, but it's pretty damn cute. Coming in at number 3, Parent Trap. So first off, consider the chances of actually conceiving twins. About 1 in 250, so that's already a cool thing. But then imagine you pull a parent trap and discover you have actually had a twin your entire life, but you were separated at birth, and then you find out that not only do you look identical, your lives are too. This is exactly what happened to two men when they were reunited at age 39. They were both named James, they both grew up to be police officers, and both their wives were named Linda. Each also had a son named James Allen and a dog named Toy. Then they both got divorced and both married a woman named Betty. What are the chances of that? More like one in a billion than 1 in 250. Coming in at number 2, we have Richard Parker and Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe, master of the macabre. This man's mind went to some pretty dark, albeit creative places. Some even say he predicted the future, which could be the only explanation for this coincidence. The narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket is one of his most terrifying, as it recounts the tale of sailors forced to eat a cabin boy named Richard Parker after being stranded on a boat after a shipwreck. People guffawed at Poe when he said that this was based off a true story, though there were none like it at the time. What is insanely creepy about the story is that 50 years later, the exact same event happened, mimicking the story in eerily close ways. The most ominous being that the boy the real sailors ate, his name was Richard Parker. Coming in at number 10, we have Stephen Hawking's death day. Stephen Hawking was one of the most brilliant minds of our time and left a scientific legacy that humans will revere for centuries to come. It was definitely a sad day when he died on March 14th, 2018. Wait a minute. Isn't that 3.14? Aren't those the first 3 numbers of pi? Why, yes. Yes, it is. But wait, that's not all. Not only does Hawking's death day coincide with pi, it also lands on Albert Einstein's birthday and on the day that Galileo also met his end. I guess great minds think alike. Coming in at number 9, we have Mark Twain and Halley's Comet. They came in together, they must go out together. This was something Twain said before he died. Mark Twain was born on November 30th, 1835, which was the same year and 2 weeks after Halley's Comet flew past. During his time on Earth, Twain was famous for such works as Tom Sawyer and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and many more. He was awesome. Twain was convinced next time the Halley Comet dropped by, that would be his time to go, and he was right. On April 21st, 1910, Mark Twain met his end, which was coincidentally the day after the comet passed by once again. Coming in at number 8, The Simpsons in general. One of the longest running TV shows in history, The Simpsons are notorious for somehow predicting outrageous events, including the president of the United States was going to be Donald Trump. If you watched the episode with Donald Trump as president today, you would probably have thought it was just another comedic, satirical episode of a TV show to do at the time. But the thing is, they wrote that sucker 19 years ago. How on earth did they guess that? With the show running for over 30 years, themes occurring in the show are eventually going to happen in real life, maybe. But this? They predicted a 3-eyed fish, a circus entertainer getting attacked mid-performance, even the Ebola outbreak. I think we can safely put down The Simpsons as one large coincidence, considering the amount they've had. They happen so often that the questions of whether they are psychic or actually secretly controlling events, I don't know, these are just things we need to know. like right now. These kinds of coincidences just need an explanation. Coming in at number 7, Catherine Eddowes and Mary Kelly. Jack the Ripper. That's pretty much all I need to say to get all the cold case crime fanatics interested. You ready? This next coincidence is a lot darker. Catherine Eddowes was one of Jack the Ripper's victims, taken only an hour after Elizabeth Stride. But this is where things get creepier. That day, Eddowes was found passed out drunk on the street and was arrested. Once she was sober enough to go home, she ended up giving the police a fake name, Mary Kelly. That same night, Eddowes was murdered, and guess who would follow in her footsteps? A woman named Mary Jane Kelly. That's ridiculous. Like, that just makes me wonder whether it actually, I know they solved the crime, but that makes me wonder as to whether, I don't know, Jack the Ripper was actually in the police force. How could that happen? How can we explain that? That's just too wild. Coming in at number 6, we have Royce Burton. Are you ever right in the middle of telling a story when the very person you're talking about like walks into the room? There are two subtle reactions. One, pretend you weren't talking about them, depending on what you were talking about. Gossiping, like, just pretend. What? Oh, what's that? Oh, who's that? Oh, hey! That's what you do. And the second one, you just look at them and go, oh, speak of the devil. Royce Burton had the latter reaction, though it's kind of cooler, when the very stranger who saved his life strolled in right as he mentioned him. Royce used to be a Texas Ranger, and one night while patrolling the Rio Grande in 1940, he got lost and tried to climb up the cliff to find his way. As he was nearing the edge, he almost fell, but then the hand of a man named Joe, reached out and hoisted him up. The two men lost contact when they both joined the war, and 25 years later, Burton had become a teacher, and he was in the middle of the story when Joe strolled in. Not missing a beat, Burton said, I'll let Joe finish the story. And his whole class were like, what? These guys hadn't seen each other in 25 years. And apparently Joe had been looking for him, and the rest is the rest of the story you know.
And number 5, World Cup. An episode from The Simpsons back in 1997 called The Cartridge Family shows Mexico and Portugal going head to head in football. Like soccer football, not like, football, you get it. Springfield residents are told to go see this match to determine which nation is the greatest on earth, Mexico or Portugal. So when the 2018 World Cup then rolled around much later, pun intended, fans were excited that this was now coming true, but at the same time had a laugh determining that Ronaldo must have missed that penalty intentionally so that the prediction would come true. That's like the theory now, that Ronaldo missed to make The Simpsons correct. A lot of theories for that one, it's always fun. But recently it's been announced that Qatar will host a tournament in November and December 2022 rather than usual June-July dates. Another World Cup, another chance for The Simpsons to add another prediction to their already impressive list. That's a creepy show. I have another Simpsons one coming up, but we'll see. Number 4, Mars life. We're back. There it is. There's the next Simpson one. That fast. There we go. Let me ask you lovely people a question. If you could go to Mars right now with 3 of your friends, would you do it? Keep in mind it's really boring, and unless you're an astronaut botanist like Matt Damon, you'll probably have a rough go. But in the future, would you do it? I would. I'd go. I'd go with one person, Force too many, that's too much. Going to Mars might be as simple as going to the mall. Apparently, The Simpsons have an episode where they show a family visit to the big red planet come 2051. But honestly, I feel like we're gonna get there a lot sooner. SpaceX is already planning to send people out there. It's a quick, 9-month trip, so make sure your phone's charged. But it's actually more beneficial for the team to travel during these peak times in the 2030s and in the 2050s. Because during these years, trips to the planet will be shorter and they'll coincide with periods of the solar maximum. So while this one may or may not come true in 2022, well, let me tell you, it's right around the corner. Or maybe in 2050. Who knows? Number 3, Titanic inspection card. This inspection card once belonged to a woman named Marion Meanwell. And you're probably thinking, what could possibly be worrisome or, creepy about an inspection card? Well, it shows how Marion was not intended to be on the Titanic that fateful day, but by some turn of events, she unfortunately found herself as one of the passengers. The card shows that she was originally meant to be traveling on a ship called the Majestic, and for some reason, the trip she originally had planned was delayed, and now she instead was assigned to the ill-fated Titanic. The eerie part is you can see the word Majestic was crossed out on her card, which then shows us the change in plans. If only people were able to see what was about to strike and they could have somehow warned her. That's the creepy thing about these coincidences. Sometimes they're just bad, You could fall out of a plane and have maggots all over you and survive, or you could go from one cursed ship to another. Number 2, Edgar Allan Poe. Okay, this is a story that actually convinced me that Edgar Allan Poe is for real a time traveler, so buckle up, grab a soda. Because 2 separate stories that he wrote both turned out to be exceptionally true and real, but not until after they'd been written. Yeah, it's a good one. Firstly, Poe's only completed novel was published in 1838, and it tells the tale of mutiny on a whaling ship lost at sea. These men on a ship realize that they're doomed and need to resort to extreme measures in order to stay alive. So they begin drawing straws to see who they're going to sacrifice to save food. A boy named Richard Parker drew the shortest straw and therefore became the next meal. Dark, let's move on. Let's fast forward to 46 years now to 1884, and in real life also, I might add. There are now 4 men who have been set adrift after the sinking of a yacht. These men found themselves in a similar predicament to the novels, and I kid you not, they ended up taking the same route and elected to sacrifice a cabin boy. A cabin boy also named Richard Parker. Odd, right? Okay. Cut to 1840, Poe penned the gruesome story The Businessman, in which the narrator suffers a traumatic head injury in his youth, and then later a violent life follows. The weird thing about this story is that Edgar Allan Poe fully understood, or so it seemed, frontal lobe injury. Now this was long before it was ever even studied or looked at, right? This type of study didn't arrive until 1848. An actual neurologist, Eric Altschuler, recently wrote how there's a dozen symptoms and he knew every single one. It's so exact and it's so weird, it's like he had a time machine. End quote. Yeah, it's almost like he had a time machine. Did he? And finally, number 1, Simpson's dome in real life. Yep, this one's gonna hit home. Let's do it. This one's gonna hit dome. That didn't work. For this one, we're looking at the Simpsons movie, which still holds up. That's a fun time. But even over the pandemic, I saw personal domes come to life, right? It was so weird. Restaurants were making these like weird tents on sidewalks just to stay in business. But an even bigger idea came long before this. Back in the 70s, there were talks about putting a dome over Manhattan, this massive dome over Midtown that regulates weather and pollution, all that good stuff. Now, if that had been built, imagine what we would have done with it during the initial breakout during this pandemic. It would have been madness. And then in 2010, later on, the city called Eco City 2020 was planned out. It was supposed to be built in Siberia. It was announced in 2014 officially, this climate controlled, domed city, 4.5 square kilometers, all that good stuff. But since 2016, the project lost the funding. What do you guys think? Should we bring back domes and just, have a little personal bubble everywhere we go? Just lose the umbrella and live in a big glass ball forever over our city? I'd do it, that'd be kind of nice. Be like living in a Coca-Cola mist zone your entire life. Just kind of like, ooh, this is nice. Number 10, twins named Jim. Okay, we'll kick this part 2 off on a lighter note. This one gets a little dark, so we'll ease our way in, The twins named Jim. Okay, that sounds like a 2026 comedy hit already. Back in 1979, a set of twins were reunited when they were 39 years old at the time. This was, of course, a big moment in their lives. For 37 years, they barely knew of each other's existence. Then when they finally met, the long-lost twins had more in common than they could have ever thought. For starters, both had been named Jim. I spoiled that in the fun title earlier. But their adoptive parents both named the lads Jim. That's insane. Jim? Like of all names, really? And both Jims just happened to love math and carpentry. Both also had jobs and security. And both also had ex-wives named Linda. And they both since married a woman named Betty. This isn't like, what? Imagine meeting another you, and he's like, oh yeah, I also love knitting and Autobots. What are the odds? No, that's too eerie. You're an alien clone. Something's afoot here. Get out of here. Not just meeting a long-lost twin at 40. No way. Number 8, atomic survivor. On August 6th and 9th, 1945, the United States detonated 2 nuclear explosives over the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This, of course, was devastating. The results in this reaction, the blast and the radiation they both caused, took the lives of nearly 90,000 people. It was horrible. But in 2009, the Japanese government confirms that there was at least 1 man who was in each city on both days of the reactions. And he lived to tell the tale. On August 6th, Satomu Yamaguchi was in Hiroshima on a business trip. As I was walking alone, I heard the sound of a plane. Just one, he told a British newspaper. I looked up into the sky and I saw the B-29 and it dropped 2 parachutes. I was looking up into the sky at them and suddenly it was like a flash of magnesium, a great flash in the sky, and I was blown over just like that. And by August 9th, he had returned home to Nagasaki only to experience the trauma for a second time. Despite the double radiation exposure, Yamaguchi lived to be 93 years old, which is incredible. He sadly passed away from stomach cancer. Number 7, Julianne Kopka. Miss Julianne has a 2-for-1 when it comes to survival stories. I had to include it. Her story starts out on Christmas Eve, a lovely day, 1971, when she was just a teenager and she was on Lanza Flight 508. Now the plane was struck by lightning, which is an actual nightmare situation that I didn't know could happen, and this led to the plane starting to disintegrate midair. yeah, it was all bad. In what felt like the blink of an eye for Julianne, she found herself still strapped to her seat 2 miles above the Peruvian rainforest. She was injured, of course, full of bruises, a broken collarbone, but she was alive after she landed. And in fact, she was the only person who had been on the flight that was still alive. Just fell out of a plane and lived to tell. That is crazy. That is bat insane. But it's like you're out of the fire into the frying pan at this point, right? Now you're in the wilderness all alone with no food, just, you know, a little bit of candy, if anything, from the plane. Julianne had found a small stream which she began to wade in downstream. She traveled along it, and the insects in the jungle were eating her alive, and sorry, this next part is gross, but maggots had infected her arm. It was like bad, worse, even worse. Now we're flowing down a river and maggots are eating me. This is incredible. Julianne ended up coming across a sort of encampment where she found a few supplies, and she was so smart and was able to give herself a little bit of first aid, which included pouring gasoline on the infected arm, which then led to all the, you know, disgusting bugs and maggots leaving it, because they're like, hey, I'm not a fan of gasoline, lunch is over, see you later. And then just a few hours later, a few lumber workers found her, and they gave her more first aid treatment and took her to an area that was more populated, where she was then airlifted for medical treatment. Now, in 2000, her story was told through the documentary titled Wings of Hope, which was directed by Werner Herzog, who particularly took interest in the story because, one, it's obviously incredible, as I was just explaining it. I read this and I'm like, it's crazy. But two, Werner Herzog also had a seat booked on that flight, and he would have been on that same flight if it wasn't for a last minute change of plans. I can't even, that should be number one, really.
We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with My Way. My Way is a beautiful song by Frank Sinatra, but it also might be cursed. Why do I say that? Well, at least 6 people were killed in the Philippines between 2000 and 2010 while singing My Way. Karaoke is a pretty popular pastime in the Philippines. However, this song is now associated with bad luck there. One time, a man was shot by a security guard for singing this song badly at a bar. Others were killed for hogging the microphone, and quite a few were killed for singing the song on repeat. Due to the repeated deaths, the song is actually banned from ever being sung or played in bars. In our 4th spot today, we have the license plate. World War I began after Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in his car on June 28, 1914. The car's license plate read AII-118, which wasn't a big deal until people realized that this was the date that World War I ended. November 11th, 1918, aka 11/11/18, just like the license plate. Now, this car was placed in a museum in Austria, and it sat there for almost 2 decades before a British tourist noticed the significance of the license plate. So literally, World War I started and ended with this car. Coming in at number 3, we have Catherine and Mary Kelly. On November 28, 1888, a woman named Catherine Eddowes was arrested after being found drunk on the streets of London. When she was taken in by the police, she gave them a fake name. She told them her name was Mary Kelly. Later, she was released. However, that night she was murdered by none other than Jack the Ripper. The freakiest part is that that same night, Jack went on to kill another woman, none other than Mary Kelly, the random fake name that Catherine gave the police, who is actually a real person and also got killed. How scary, but also how tragic. In our 2nd spot, we have the Disney lovers. In the early 2000s, engaged couple Alex and Donna were looking through some old photos when they came across one of Donna and her siblings at Disney. While in the background of the photo, they spotted none other than Alex and his family. Alex is the boy in the stroller being pushed by his father. So not only did they go to Disney at the same time, they just so happened to be in the same spot at the same time and got it on camera. I guess that's how you know that your love was meant to be. Years later, they decided to take their kids to Disney and recreate this iconic photo. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the lightning strike. There is a 1 in 500,000 chance of being hit by lightning. There's a 1 in 9 million chance of being struck by lightning twice. What about being struck by lightning 3 different times? This happened to a man named Major Walter Summerford. He was struck by lightning 3 different times throughout his life and survived. Not only that, but when he did pass away, his gravestone was also struck by lightning. What are the odds of that? Like, did he piss off Zeus or something? Starting off this countdown, we have the 4th of July. The 4th of July is a big celebration in America. The holiday marks the signing of the Declaration of Independence. But did you know that a lot of US figures have died on July 4th? In fact, 3 of the first 5 US presidents died on this date, 2 within hours of each other. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson both died on July 4th, 1826. The 5th president, James Monroe, exactly 5 years later passed away as well. Seems to be a deadly date for presidents. Like, what are the odds? In our 9th spot, we have Barbary Shore. Barbary Shore is a novel written by Norman Mailer. It's about a character who rents a room in a Brooklyn boarding house in order to write a novel. Then a minor character is introduced, and it's his neighbor who turns out to be a Russian spy. Well, after the novel was finished, Mailer's neighbor was arrested for being a Russian spy and hiding out in his apartment, just like in the book he wrote. And he had no prior knowledge of his neighbor. Now that's freaky. In our 8th spot, we have The Omen. The Omen is a 1976 horror movie that caused a number of real-life tragedies. As a result, it's been called a real-life horror movie or a cursed one. A number of the cast members got into horrific accidents. For example, special effects consultant John Richardson got into a crash, and his assistant Liz Moore was cut in half during an accident, similar to the death of a character in the actual film. That's not all. The screenwriter and executive producer were both on different planes that got struck by lightning on different occasions. It's just wild how so many cast and crew members experienced tragedy after working on the film. Is this a coincidence, or is the film actually cursed? In our 7th spot, we have William Shakespeare. More like William Shakespeare, because I was shook after hearing this. So Psalm 46 in the book of Psalm reads, "Here was I like a psalm." The freaky part is that this is an anagram for William Shakespeare. Arrange the letters and it spells his name. But wait, it gets weirder. The 46th word in Psalm 46 in the King James Bible is shake, and the 46th word from the end is spear. And how old was William Shakespeare when the King James Bible was first completed? He was 46 years old. So someone explain this to me. Please go ahead. Try and explain this. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with Anthony Hopkins. In the early 1970s, Anthony Hopkins was casted to play Koista in The Girl from Petrovka. This film was based on the book of the same name. Now, to prepare for the role, he was going to read the book. However, he was unable to find any copy of the book in any bookstore. He searched all over the place, but to no avail. Then, randomly one day, as he was sitting in the London tube station, he found a copy of that book just laying around. Not only that, but when he opened the book, he found that it was signed by its author. Literally, the universe brought him what he was looking for. What are the odds of someone leaving that book behind and then Anthony finding it? The very book he was desperately looking for. Coming in at number 4, we have The Close Calls. In 2014, Dutch cyclist Martin de Jong had plans to head from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur. He was scheduled to be on Malaysia Airlines Flight 17. But before his flight, he bumped his ticket up to catch a later flight because it was cheaper. That is the airline that was shot down while flying over eastern Ukraine. All passengers lost their lives. That's not all. In March, he had a flight from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. Again, he decided to bump his ticket up at the last minute to get a cheaper deal. And it's a good thing that he did. He was scheduled to be on Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, the one that disappeared, never to be seen again. So Martin escaped death twice, all because he wanted a better deal and save some money. He's a lucky, lucky man, but also unlucky that he was supposed to be on both of those flights. In our 3rd spot, we have the plum pudding. Mathematician Joseph Mazur shared this creepy coincidence involving French poet Émile Deschamps with plum pudding in his book Fluke. So back in the day, a man named Émile was first introduced to plum pudding by a man named Mr. de Forgebus. From that moment on, every time he had plum pudding, he would encounter Mr. de Forgebus, and I hope I'm saying his name right. The second time he had plum pudding, he was at a restaurant and ordered it, but the waiter was like, "Sorry, we just sold the last pudding to this man," and points to the back of the restaurant. Lo and behold, it was Mr. de Forgebus. A decade later, he went to a dinner party, and at the party, they were serving plum pudding. Émile made a joke like, "Who's this party for, Mr. de Forgebus?" And at that very moment, he walked through the door. But he wasn't even supposed to be at that party. He had accidentally come to the wrong door on his way to another dinner party. So what are the odds that every time that this man had plum pudding, Mr. DeForgeaboo was there? It's kind of like Beetlejuice, you know, you say his name 3 times and he'll appear, except in this case, you have plum pudding and he'll appear. Moving on to number 2, we have Flight 666. Now this one gives me the absolute creeps. On Friday the 13th, Flight 666 departed from Copenhagen and landed in Helsinki, aka H-E-L, hell. Let me say that again for you. Flight 666 flew to hell on Friday the 13th. I don't know about you, but if I was scheduled on that flight, I would cancel immediately. I ain't taking no chances. But thankfully, the flight landed safely in Helsinki. Thank gosh it did, because that seems like one cursed flight. It's plain creepy how it lined up exactly like that. Pun intended. Get it? Plain creepy. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the prediction of James Dean's death. On September 30th, 1955, James Dean died in a car accident. He was only 24 years old. And it seems like a man named Alec Guinness actually predicted this would happen. He warned Dean and said, and I quote, "If you get in that car, you will be found dead in it by this time next week." A week later, Dean was involved in a terrible car accident and he sadly lost his life. In fact, Alec had said that the car was sinister, and I think he's right. Later, parts of the car were recovered and resold and placed into other cars. All the car owners who had parts of James Dean's car were also involved in deadly crashes. Not only that, but the mechanic working on the car died after the car rolled off the back of a truck and crushed the legs of the mechanic. So Alec was onto something here and tried to warn Dean. Starting off this countdown, we have Thomas W. Lawson. Thomas W. Lawson was a British stockbroker who in 1907 published a book called Friday the 13th. The story was about a stockbroker who tried to make the entire stock market crash on Friday the 13th, hence the name of the book. Little did he know that he would eerily predict the future. On Friday, December 13th of 1907, a ship named Thomas W. Lawson, named after a completely different Thomas W. Lawson, not the author, set sail on her first transatlantic voyage. That day, she sank. Isn't that bizarre? A ship named Thomas W. Lawson crashed and sunk on Friday the 13th. I'm telling you, this guy predicted the future whether he meant to or not. Moving on to number 9, we have the start and end of America's Civil War. In July of 1861, Wilmer McLean's Virginia home was involved in the first battle of Bull Run. In fact, the general of the battle wrote a diary entry about a cannonball crashing through McLean's kitchen. He wrote, and I quote, "A federal shell fell into the fireplace of my headquarters at the McLean house." Now, due to safety reasons, McLean moved his family home from the front lines to a new home in Appomattox County. Well, guess what? The battle ended up ending in his parlor in 1865. So it started in his backyard and ended in his parlor. So he was involved in the beginning and the end. Moving on to number 8, we have the birth chart. This story was shared by Raina Lee R on Reddit. So according to her, her brother's doctor would always get his chart mixed up at the office. And that's because there was another kid under his care with the same first and last name. To make things weirder, they were both born on the same day, just different months of the same year. And their mothers had the same name. What are the odds of that? I'll be saying that a lot in this video, so get used to it. But for someone to have the same first and last name as you, it's absolutely wild. And the same doctor. I just hope that they met and became best friends. Coming in at number 7, we have the Marks. This story was shared by Pata95 Nishta on Reddit. And this story is about to blow your mind. So according to her, her best friend from elementary school has 3 sisters. All 3 sisters grew up to marry engineers. Not only that, but all of their husbands were named Mark. And her best friend, I guess, followed this tradition because when she got older, she also married an engineer named Mark. What are the odds that all husbands' names were Mark and all of them are engineers? This is wild to me. Like, did the sisters do that on purpose? Are all engineers just named Mark? Also, that must be so confusing at family get-togethers and dinners. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Danielle Dutoit. The irony behind this next story is mind-blowing. So Danielle Dutoit was a South African astronomer. Over his life, he discovered and co-discovered several comets. He also spent his days giving lectures. On September 28th, 1981, he gave a lecture on how death can strike anyone at any time. As soon as the lecture was done, he popped a mint into his mouth. The mint then slid to the back of his throat, he choked on it, and died right then and there. So yeah, I'd say his lecture was pretty spot on. In our fourth spot today, we have Harry Zigland. Now, this story is kind of controversial. Some say it's an old wives' tale. Others say that it actually did happen. Now, if it did happen, then this is the definition of karma. So back in the day, there was a man named Harry Zigland who broke a woman's heart. She was so heartbroken that she took her own life. Her brother was so devastated and angry at Harry that he vowed to get revenge on him. So he went out to find Harry with his gun and shot at him. Harry fell to the floor, and the brother, thinking that he had succeeded in killing him, grabbed his gun and took his own life. But Harry survived. The bullet didn't strike him. Instead, it hit and got lodged into a nearby tree. 3 years later, Henry was using dynamite to remove the tree. When he blew it up, the explosion sent the bullet out of the tree, and it hit and instantly killed him. It took karma 3 years, but it finally caught up to him. Coming in at number 3, we have the Hoover Dam. Over the course of the construction of the Hoover Dam, there were 96 deaths. The first death was of a man named J.G. or George Turney. It occurred on December 20th, 1922. He sadly lost his life after drowning in the dam. 14 years later, on the exact anniversary of this guy's death, his son, Patrick Turney, lost his life. He fell from an electrical tower and died. This was also the final death reported during the construction of the dam, meaning the first man to die and the last man were father and son, and it happened on the exact same day. Coming in at number 2, we have Jack Frost and Other Stories. Some things are just meant to be, and you'll believe this once you hear this next story. Children's book author Anne Parrish was with her husband in Paris when they stopped by an antique bookshop from the 1920s. While in there, she found a copy of Jack Frost and Other Stories. She told her husband that that was her favorite book as a child. Well, when he opened the book, it had her name written inside of it. It read Anne Parrish, 209N Weber Street, Colorado Springs. So not only did it have Anne's name in the book, but it had the place she grew up in, Colorado Springs. Seems like Anne was meant to find that book. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the 2 presidents. It turns out that Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy share a lot of eerie coincidences. Besides the fact that they both were American presidents, they both were killed by a gunshot wound to the back of the head. They both passed away on a Friday. They both died before a celebration. Kennedy was assassinated on the eve of Thanksgiving. Lincoln died right before Easter. And each were accompanied by their wife and another couple when they were killed. But that's not all. They both had best friends named Billy Graham. Both Billys had 4 children, and they both had secretaries named after the other president. Kennedy's secretary was Miss Lincoln. Lincoln's secretary was John. But wait, there's even more. Both of their successors were vice presidents called Johnson. The freakiest coincidence, Lincoln was shot in Ford's Theater. Kennedy was shot in a Lincoln made by